Hi everybody, this is lecture 3.2, The Myth of the American Dream and the Realities of Class in America. So, as I've said a few times already in this course, sociology can be a bit of a bummer. This is one of those lectures. We aren't going as thoroughly depressing as the race units went, but we are going to be talking about how some of our ideas that we have about how reality works are a little more depressing than what it actually is. So first we'll talk about our perceptions of class, then we'll talk about how class actually exists in the United States. We as a society don't really talk about social class. In general, it's seen as being rude to talk about social class, and not all societies are like that. This is something that's kind of particular to the United States. So we don't talk about how much money we make. We don't talk about how much our houses cost. We don't talk about how much our cars cost. When we give presents to people for birthday or Christmas or whatever, we take those price tags off, right? We don't talk about money. It's seen as being rude to talk about money. And this kind of leads us to not talk about class. When we do talk about class, we often put it in terms of the American dream, and it's shaped by the American dream. And what exactly the American dream is can vary from person to person or subculture to subculture, but the most typical version of the American dream is that anyone can be financially successful in the United States if they work hard enough. Unfortunately, this isn't based in reality, and there are certain myths that are tied in with that we see aren't really true once we break it down. This isn't to say that where we live isn't a nice place to live. It isn't to say that Americans are inherently nasty people, but it is to say that this idea of being able to get financial success just because you want it isn't necessarily true. So there are four general sub-myths tied in with this American dream. First, this myth that the United States is a classless society. This simply is not true. We have classes in the United States. We obviously have rich people in the United States. We obviously have people in the middle, and we obviously have poor people in the United States. To think otherwise is equivocally untrue. But just because we don't have laws to say that rich people get these things, we don't have laws to say you must do these things to poor people, just because it's not legally mandated does not mean that class doesn't still exist in the United States. The second myth is that that we are a middle class nation. Most people think of themselves as middle class. However, the American middle class is actually shrinking, and it has been consistently shrinking since about the 1970s. And then there are millions of people in the United States who are not middle class. And if you break down the demographics of the United States, only about 30 to 40% of the population is what you can actually call middle class. The rest of us are something else. There's the myth that we are all getting richer. And actually, the sad reality of that is that the United States has been polarizing for decades. The rich are indeed getting richer, but those of us who aren't rich, the poor, are getting poorer, and the middle class is also getting poorer. While the mega rich are really the only ones that continue to get richer and continue to benefit from this quote-unquote good economy we've had since about 2008. And another myth, unfortunately, is that everyone has a chance to succeed. And the reality of that is that certain populations have distinct disadvantages in terms of success. And we've talked about race in that regard. We've talked about class to some degree, but also sex, sexual orientation, age, ability, who your parents were. All of these things are part of your ability to succeed, and everyone does not have an equal chance to succeed, unfortunately. Additionally, while the American dream is a nice idea, it props up classism. And if we believe that anyone can be successful if they work hard enough, we are also led to believe that if someone is poor, that they did something to deserve to be poor. So, and I refuse to believe that the majority, all, and certainly not the majority of poor people, deserve to go hungry, deserve to not have heat in their homes over the winter. That's not something that any human being deserves. Or similarly, that if someone is super rich, that they deserve to be super rich. So here we have Jay-Z and his daughter Blue Ivy, and as cute and I'm sure delightful as that child is, I don't think she did anything to deserve having two parents that are billionaires, right? Like combined assets of Jay-Z and Beyonce put them in billionaire category, right? That child doesn't deserve the life she's living. I'm good for her, but she didn't deserve it. Marxist theory suggests that the ideology of the American dream may prevent real social change from happening. So, in order for workers to overthrow or to challenge, even if we're going to be moderate about it, challenge the ruling classes, workers must realize what they have in common with each other, i.e., they have to develop class consciousness, right? Workers have to realize what they have in common with each other and that they don't have anything in common with the bosses. And they must reject the idea the upper classes have anything in common. That false consciousness that all of us in society, we are in this together. While that sounds nice, it rejects the fact that the people who are in charge and exploiting us are doing anything wrong, right? That the super greedy people in society are doing anything wrong. That concept is what Marx would call false consciousness. And if we were in an in-person class, we would do a little bit more debating about what is false consciousness, what is class consciousness, what classifies as that. But that is one of the limitations of an online classroom. But there are reasons why we have false consciousness. We have this belief in meritocracy, which, in the United States, we like to believe that if you get something, you should be rewarded. And that is a nice idea. But the reality of the matter is that people that have nice things haven't necessarily done anything to earn it. Another thing that props up false consciousness is how we view ourselves is often inaccurate and not objective. This perpetuates the myth that we are all middle class and thus we are all the same. We desperately want to believe, and this is toward this speaks a lot to the American character, that we want to believe that we're all the same. And while all humans, we all have the same sets of emotions and all that, we don't all have the same amount of money. We don't. That's the nature of capitalism. We have the belief that capitalism is based on premise of economic opportunity, and anything else would result in tyranny. And this is weaved into the American ideology. The untrueness of that is that democracy is a political system, and that political system of democracy is based on equality. That is absolutely true. But over the course of the 20th century, because of the Cold War, we developed this weird ideology in the United States that capitalism also equates equality. And the reality of the fact is that capitalism does not equate equality, right? Capitalism means that you should be able to try for as much money as you want, right? That is the cornerstone of capitalism, that the government will not stop you from being able to make money. That is capitalism. And that's the opposite right? That's the opposite of economic equality. Economic equality is giving everyone the same amount of money every year and the government regulating it. So this false dichotomy started during the Cold War, and it continues because the dichotomy assists the status quo. So effectively, what the Marxist theorist would say is that effectively we believe and we perpetuate this belief that capitalism is the same thing as democracy because the rich and powerful like it that way. More on our perceptions of class. So we do attach certain virtues with certain class statuses. And the way we view the rich in the United States is really interesting because we have kind of like what George Orwell would call doublethink, right? We think of the rich as being deserving, as being smart, as being sophisticated, that if you have a lot of money, you must have done something very good to do that, right? But we also believe that the rich are rich because they're greedy, because they're decadent, and because they're selfish, right? So we believe good things about the rich when we want to believe good things about the rich, but we also believe bad things about the rich when that suits us as well. Now, the middle class in the United States is a little bit different. To be middle class in the United States means to be ordinary and to be like everyone else, to be family oriented, to be how we classify all American, and almost everyone actually claims to be middle class. I will likely link a documentary called People Like Us to this unit. And in that documentary, it explores what does it mean that everyone in the United States claims to be middle class. Like I said earlier, less than the majority of the United States is actually middle class. So why do we all claim we're middle class? Well, because we want to be like everyone else. Because that equality idea is a very American thing. Now, the working class are believed to be hardworking, humble, quote-unquote, salt-of-the-earth people. And the working class is a close runner-up to the kind of people that, we all want to be working class. We all want to be middle class. More people want to be middle class, but a lot of people are perfectly fine with being working class too. And when politics come into play, rich politicians often also claim to be quote-unquote working class. Joe Biden, the former vice president, often is pinned as being working class. And he makes dramatically less than many politicians in Washington, but his net worth is $900,000, right? That's not working class. That is upper class. Similarly, George W. Bush, the former president of the United States, also is sometimes pinned with this working class label. And George W. Bush is certainly not working class, right? But both of these guys are sometimes pinned as being champions of the working class. But you will also note that they are not wearing t-shirts and jeans to Washington, right? They are wearing suits with collars and ties to Washington, and those are also signifiers of upper class status. Virtues we attach to the poor. No one really wants to say that they're poor in the United States. We associate being poor with not trying hard enough, with being stupid, with deserving their lot in life. None of these things are true, mind you. These are what we believe about the poor. That the poor didn't work hard enough, and because they didn't work hard enough, they deserve what they have. Teeth are a very strong indicator of class status in the United States because it indicates not that you don't know how to brush your teeth. Everyone knows how to brush their teeth. But things do go wrong with the human mouth, right? And when things go wrong, you can get it fixed if you have a little bit of money, right? But if you don't have any money, you can't get it fixed, right? So we assume when we see people with bad teeth that they are poor, or that or whatever. We believe bad things about people with bad teeth, which is just mind-boggling. All it means is that you have a health condition, is all it means. Now, we looked at our perceptions of class. Now let's look at the realities of class. So the people we call rich are the top 5%. And, well, there's the top 5% and then the top 1% within that. The wealthiest 1% of American society holds 34% of the total wealth in the United States. As we defined before, wealth is the possessions, the things that you own, right? And more specifically, wealth is better defined as the things that you own that earn you money. Income then is the money you have coming in each year, and the rich, the top 1%, control 34% of the total wealth in the United States. That's crazy. The income of the rich typically comes from their returns on investment. So the income of the rich typically comes from that wealth, right? That is the main dynamic of the top 1%. Now here, when I'm talking about income, I'm talking about this top 5% now. The average income, the mean income of the rich are about $202,000 per year. And the range of that income, so the least amount of money you can make to be considered within that top 5% is $112,000 per year and up. You make more than that, you're also top 5%. The richest of the rich can be divided between often old money and new money. The old money people, their families have always had money, and those fortunes can be traced back often centuries, which are your Rockefellers and those kinds of people in the United States. Other societies have other old money people. The nouveau riche, then, the new money people, these are the people that did actually do something to earn the money in their generation, right? So these are your Bill Gates types. These are your people that built up a fast food chicken place and earned a whole piles of money like that, or maybe even someone who won like the Mega Millions lottery and actually did invest it properly. These are the new rich. And when interacting with the old rich, they often try desperately to fit in, but they find it very hard to fit in. There's a phenomenon known as affluenza among the nouveau rich, that they spend and spend and spend and spend in an effort to look rich. If you're familiar with F. Scott Fitzgerald's work, The Great Gatsby, that book talks about what it is to try to fit in like that. Now, the upper middle class, these are people who are effectively the rich people that you know. If you know any rich people, they're probably upper middle class. They're probably not actually top 5% upper class, because those people have private clubs. They have private gated communities. You usually don't know the top 5%, but you do know the upper middle class. These are the rich people you know. The wealth of the upper middle class, individuals may hold some wealth. This often takes the form of real estate investments. Typically, they own their own homes. They might maybe own, a couple one fast food franchise, or they might own a gas station that they oversee, or maybe they own a couple rental properties, and maybe one in Florida, one here, one there, something like that. I have a couple family members that are like this. I certainly am not upper middle class. The mean income of an upper middle class family is $92,000 a year. Take note that these incomes and these ranges, these are family incomes typically. And the range for that is anywhere from $112,000 to $72,000. Typical jobs for upper middle class people are doctors, lawyers, upper managers in corporations, independent professionals. I have a great uncle who was relatively successful in a chain of highway truck stop gas station things. So it doesn't have to necessarily be super what we would think of classy things. I have another aunt who oversees a medical screening operation, right? So mammograms and that sort of thing. So those people would classify as independent professionals. Middle class. These people, this is what we talk about as being middle class or middle class. The wealth most middle class people have is they often own their own homes and they might have some modest retirement investment, and that's about it as far as wealth goes for middle class people. Middle class people usually don't have much actual wealth. They might have money in the bank, but they don't have wealth that accrues a lot of money for them. Income. The mean income for a middle class family is about $56,000 a year. That's what it means to be middle class, but it ranges anywhere from $72,000 to $43,000 a year. That's middle class. Typical jobs of middle class people are office workers or people that use their brains or their ability to process knowledge or information. That's what middle class jobs mean in the United States today. So we're talking accountants, secretaries, clerks, many government employees, many IT professionals, those sorts of people. Working class people, then, sometimes referred to as lower middle class. Working class person might own their own house. They might have a pension if they're in a union. But again, the wealth of the working class is similarly limited, just as the wealth of the middle class is. The average household income for working class people is around $32,000 a year, with that range being between $43,000 and $22,000. Typical jobs for working class people are often physical laborers, such as construction workers, mechanics, bus drivers. I did make a mistake on this slide. I see it right now. Also qualifying within the working class are people that work in restaurants, right? So you're a professional waiter, right? Not someone that's just going through college, but someone that really does it for a living. That's a working class job. Cooks, those sorts of things. And working class people are actually more common to be members of unions, which is a relatively working class phenomena, but it can also be a middle class phenomena as well. So let's talk about unions for a moment and then come back to this class breakdown thing. So unions are often attacked by politicians and owners of business as economic scapegoats. The people that are up against unions love to blame unions for their problems. And those people that love to blame unions for their problems do it because it's politically advantageous to do that. So they say things like, well, we had to move the factory to Mexico because of the union, or we had to lay off workers because of the union, right? Because that's what companies say, right? And the company doesn't like the union because the union forces the company to pay workers more, right? So there you see the inherent difference between the workers and the owners that Marx would immediately point out, right? Or we also hear in our society, union teachers are what's making public education too expensive. All of these are definitively untrue. Public education should be a big priority in our society. Corruption within administration is what makes public education too expensive. And waste in government is not what makes public education too expensive, but makes it hard to fund public education because other areas are being there's colossal waste, right? unions challenge those with power and wealth, and this is why they don't like unions, right? This is why the rich don't like unions, is because they challenge that power. And the upper classes think they should be able to do whatever they want to do, but unions force bosses to take workers into considerations. And that's why wealthy politicians don't like unions, is because they force them to think about what the working class and what the middle class need. What exactly are unions in the United States? I say in the United States because unions can be a little different in different parts of the world. But in the United States, a union is a group of workers in a given workplace who agree to collectively bargain a contract. That's what unions are in the United States. So all the workers get together. They agree that we're going to have a group contract, and as a group, we are going to negotiate that contract with the boss. How do unions actually work? Well, it is that contract negotiation in regular intervals. Usually a union contract lasts every 3 to 5 years, and the contract addresses worker pay, worker benefits, and quote-unquote working conditions, which could really be anything involved with doing the job, right? So if you are a teacher in a classroom and you're in a teacher's union, maybe having enough chalk in the classroom, maybe having a reliable clock in the classroom, maybe having good air conditioning, those are all working conditions, right? If you're working at a steel mill, getting a new set of overalls every 6 months, or safety conditions and proper guardrails, those are working conditions in a steel mill. And then if the bosses refuse to negotiate, in this every 3 to 5 year cycle, they refuse to do it in what's called good faith, then the workers could go on strike. That is the workers' bargaining chip, right? They could, and they are legally allowed to go on strike as long as it's over these contract things. They cannot be replaced. A worker who's on a legal strike cannot be replaced by what's called a scab. We'll talk about that in another lecture. And workers vote to go on strike or not. The union cannot quote-unquote make workers go on strike. The people who are members of the union, they vote to go on strike or not. That's a common misconception. Union dues are typically 2 to 3% of the worker's salary. And if you're not getting your money's worth out of that, you have a bad union, basically. If you're not getting a pay increase because you have a union, if you're not getting better health insurance benefits because of the union, then you have a bad union that you need to try to fix, probably by running for office within that union. I say all of this, I don't know if I've mentioned this. I was a union organizer for 3 years, so I know the ins and outs of this stuff relatively well. If you would happen to want a union, you should talk to your coworkers and contact a union that makes sense for you. You cannot be legally fired for trying to form a union. That's not to say that that doesn't happen and people are illegally fired for that, but as long as 2 people are organizing together, they can't legally fire you for that reason. And you need 50% of the people in your workplace plus 1 person to have to agree to have a union, and then basically you can have a union. Basically that is a government overseen election is what would take place. The presence of a union, now looking at this at more of a macro scale, have allowed working class people to live middle class lifestyles through increased pay, through paid vacation time, right? The ability to take a vacation, through better medical benefits. And in the 20th century, lines were often blurred between working class and middle class people for this very reason, right? When unions were very strong in the United States, it was hard to tell who's working class and who's middle class because we had auto workers with really good pensions and really nice houses. And it was hard to tell that difference. And that's because of the difference that unions made in this country. Now that unions have been attacked and diminished since the 1980s, that those lines are becoming solid again. And on the extreme macro scale, the structural contributions made by unions to society have been 2-day weekends where most people are off on Saturday and Sunday. The concept of the 40-hour work week, the concept of employment benefits, and that full-time workers should be given health insurance. That idea is a union concept. And outlawing child labor, that is also a union idea. Before unions existed, up until about the 1910s and 1920s, there were children working in factories. But back to our class structure bit. The working poor, wealth-wise, they very rarely have any real wealth. Their mean yearly income is about $12,000 a year, but that can range anywhere from $22,000 to $7,000 per year. They often have problems with dental and health issues, as I discussed. The poor are perceived as being dirty, and this is caused by poverty, right? If your clothes are old and you can't afford new clothes, that's not because you're dirty. You might have clean clothes, but the reality of the matter is you can't afford new clothes. The working poor may qualify for government assistance, so things that are often labeled as welfare, but they face problems by being caught in between income brackets. So my wife is a social worker, and she works with people that are stuck in this spot, right? So typically things like heating and cooling assistance, those are things that are given to anyone that wants to apply for them. But things like food stamps are given out and regulated very heavily. And if you make more than like $5 more than the limit for food stamps, you can't have food stamps. And even though that is something that would really, really help your family, right? Or you can't have things like COBRA or Medicaid or health care that is designed to help working people, right? Because you make $500 too much a year, right? Even though that would save you like as much as, let's just making this up right now. Let's say that would save you $2,000 a year, but you make $500 too much. Well, what does that tell the working person, right? That tells them quit your job and become a little bit poorer so you can get that help. That's that kind of inflexibility built into the government assistance programs doesn't help anybody, right? If it was, anyway, it's beside the point. The underclass. These are people who almost never have any appreciable wealth. It's almost hard to imagine being this hard off, but a lot of people are. People that make less than $75,000 per year. The underclass are often unemployed. They are often fully dependent on government assistance, as opposed to the working poor who, just maybe get heating assistance. And the underclass may turn up to illegal means to make money. If you remember from your Social 101 or your Deviance class, you remember Merton's strain theory, these people are the innovators, right? These are people that are pretty desperate to make money, so they might take what could be called an illegal job. Drug dealing, prostitution, things like that. Sex work, sorry. That's pretty much it for that. Now, let's talk a bit more about the realities of poverty that haven't fallen in. There are a couple different ways that we can define poverty. First, we have relative poverty. So this is how you feel, right? You either feel poor or you don't. So if you live in a well-off neighborhood and you can't afford the things that your neighbors have, that is a state of relative poverty, right? So I actually live in a pretty nice neighborhood. A lot of the people that live around me have a lot more money than we do. Me and my, the college teacher and the social worker, right? We have a family. And the people around us, some of them have a lot more money, right? We can't take multiple vacations a year, right? We don't have super great health insurance. Our cars break down relatively frequently, right? We're living probably working class lives, right? But the people around us, like, they go on like extravagant European vacations, multiple vacations a year, etc. We feel poor. We're not poor. We're not poor by any stretch. We're like right between middle class and working class. But sometimes we feel it. Or if you are poor and you live in a poor neighborhood, right? If you live in a poor rural town or a poor inner city place, but everyone around you is also poor, maybe you don't feel poor because that's all you know, right? These are both, so you wouldn't feel poor in that condition. So anyway, that's the idea of relative poverty. Absolute poverty then is not as subjective as relative poverty is. Absolute poverty is absolutely objective. It's poverty that puts an individual's health at risk, right? So you can't afford nutritious food, and then you get health problems because of that. Or you go cold in the winter time. Or you can't afford a car and you have to walk and your knees get damaged because of that from years and years of walking like that to work 5 miles every day. That is absolute poverty. The federal poverty line as of 2004, which is this is still pretty accurate. This is still where the line is. Personal income for the federal poverty line is if you make less than $9,000 per year, you are considered to be in poverty in the United States. If you have a family of 4 that makes less than $19,000 a year, that is under the federal poverty guidelines. And 13% of the population in the United States live below the official poverty line. That's 16.4 million children that live in poverty. And my wife worked with the Mid-Ohio Food Bank. And in central Ohio, 1 in 5 children go hungry on a regular basis. So that they feel those hunger pains on a regular basis. That's what it looks like in the United States. 3.5 million people also experience homelessness every year as well. And 1.4 million of those are children. That's what that looks like. And it's a good thing we're done because it sounds like my baby is waking up from her nap. So I will talk to you later, and good luck.